That has been a little bit of a hot topic. I knew this was considered or could be considered controversial. But I didn't quite understand how tied to Melvin Dewey so many librarians are.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Season 4 of the Future Ready Librarian podcast series, Leading from the Library. This is a podcast for all librarians, wherever you are in your journey. It is filled with amazing guests, important topics, and engaging conversations that will inspire, engage, and support all of us as future ready librarians. I am your host, Shannon Mcclintock Miller. I am the district teacher librarian at Van Meter Community in Van Meter, Iowa, and serve as the Future Ready Librarian spokesperson. I have the pleasure of working within my library and school community and also with others around the country and the world through Future Ready Librarian events, conferences, consulting, writing, and more. I am honored to bring these voices and the work of others to our podcast and to all of you. For Season 4, we've added a few new segments to our podcast, including the Future Ready Librarian shout-outs and shares from our listeners. We will be gathering these shout-out shares and questions for each episode, so be on the lookout to chime in and celebrate what you are doing within your library and school too. For our Future Ready Librarian shout-out today, I would like to give a shout-out to all of the amazing teacher librarians in Alaska. This week, I went to Anchorage, Alaska for the ASTE conference. We had a great time connecting and learning together. We focused on Future Ready Librarians, choice boards, collaboration, and so much more. It is definitely their time to shine, so I wanted to let them know how awesome they are. And for our Future Ready Librarian share, I would like to share a new Future Ready guide for supporting students. It is the new Future Ready SEL guide based on the Future Ready framework, developed in partnership with Edulastic, GoGuardian, and Pear Deck. This guide will help you personalize your approach to keep student health and well-being at the core of your ongoing progress and planning. The framework keeps learners at the center and encourages districts to address each of the 7 key categories called gears in order to ensure fidelity of implementation on your transformation journey. We will add a link to the Future Ready SEL guide in the notes of this podcast, so definitely take some time to check it out. So today, I am so excited to welcome my friends Brandy and Liz as we talk about one of my favorite topics, ditching the Dewey. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for having us.
I know, I'm so excited. We're just talking about before we started that we had to change things around a couple times because of weather and health and all kinds of things. So I'm really glad to have you today on the show. So let's just start by having you both introduce yourselves.
Okay, I'm Brandy Rowland, and I am in my 16th year of being a library media specialist in Lake Jackson, Texas. Currently, I work at O.M. Roberts Elementary, and we serve students kinder through 4th grade.
Great.
I'm Liz Fambro. I am a librarian at a 7th-8th grade campus, Lake Jackson Intermediate, and this is my 20th year in education.
Very good. I know I met you gals quite a few years ago, right? So yes. I have been following their great work, and when I saw them post on the Future Ready Librarian page a few months ago about a project that they had been working on, I couldn't wait to ask them a little bit more. So let's just start by telling about that post and what you guys have been up to in your library.
So we had been, a few years ago, we started the genreification of our fiction section of our library and have seen how it's just increased circulation and ease of student browsing and location of material that they want to read. And so we were really toying with the idea of moving that into our nonfiction section, but it just seems like such a daunting task. And then we kept talking about it and kind of knocking back and forth and trying to work out the details. And then Brandy saw a post by the Book Wrangler and called me right up. We looked at it, kind of went through what he had set up, and decided that I was going to take the plunge. So it just happened to be the year that we came back to school after COVID. So I wasn't having classes come into the library. I was doing virtual classes, and then I was pushing into their classrooms. So I closed the nonfiction section down, and I just tore into it and started categorizing it. And it took a long time because I didn't know what trouble to anticipate or what things to plan for. But after going through and completing that at the 5-6 campus that I was at the time, now that I have completed it at my 7-8 campus, it went so much smoother. Just knowing what categories to use, what process to go through. And so I'm just really excited to see the kids and how they're going to react to this new organization system.
We worked great together as a team because I'll go out, well, we both go out and collect big ideas, but I get these big lofty ideas that I'm, collecting and stealing from other librarians. And then I'll throw that out there to Liz. And then she's the more brave of the two. And so she'll go put it into play. And that works well because she's more of an analytical thinker. So she gets the spreadsheets going and builds the plan and the checklist. And then she works out all the kinks. And then she'll throw it back to me and tell me, okay, here are the steps and here's how it works. And then I'm more of the worker bee. So once I have the framework that Liz has already planned out, then I can go in and put it to use and then try it for myself. So I would say she's brave, and then I'm an excellent copycat.
No, you are definitely the more creative of the two.
Oh, that's such a good combo though, to have that, because something, a big task, because we ditched the Dewey years ago at our school, but I had my library associate, Diana, and at the time my daughter, Brianna, was in high school. And so the three of us, having those partnerships of, I'm always the one that has these crazy ideas, and having people on the other side be more analytical or be more critical or be more creative, like that's a really, really good combination to have.
That teamwork really helped us a lot, because when we were feeling a little less confident in where to place books or what to do, we could kind of remind each other of the process and help each other make some of those decisions. And then just to realize how flexible it is. Just because we put a book one place doesn't mean we can't change it. Just like when we did our genreification, I think that really helped a lot, just to help each other through that. Because like with any project, it tends to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
I know. I remember that. I know. And so from there, I'm sure that our listeners are probably wondering, like, where do you even start? Like, what is the process behind a project like this?
My suggestion, if you're starting to take apart and break down your nonfiction, is to start with the 500s, because it's the easiest section to identify categories. It's the easiest to sort. So you can kind of build confidence, I think, by starting with the 500s.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that worked out well.
Yeah.
And also starting, even before you start actually sorting your books, starting with weeding. And
absolutely.
Get rid of everything, set your parameters. I'm going to weed everything that has a copyright before X or whatever. And then everything that's in bad shape, and set your parameters for what works for you. And then get rid of all the materials that you're not going to want there anymore, because there's no sense in physically moving them and stressing over what category they're going to be in, and then later go, oh, well, I don't even want this book anyway. So I think weeding is excellent, and then starting in the 500s is easy.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because it definitely helps to have the least amount of materials as possible. And that's one of the big benefits, I think, of doing this, is it highlights areas that you need materials.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's going to make, and I'm curious if you found the same thing, but I feel like it's going to make collection development so much easier to be able to see those categories just stand out of what you need.
Mm-hmm. I remember when going through that too, of like seeing books and remembering books that I didn't even have myself. And then being able to go to the shelf, and I still do that. And not only are readers finding it and our teachers, but even me as the librarian, like I, go there and I'm like, oh yeah, we need books in, that category, or we need to have, the series complete or whatever it might be in those nonfiction categories is just so much easier. And it makes so much sense with collection development.
Yes.
But the weeding thing, definitely. Like, I don't know about you guys, but we got rid of a lot of books that we, yes. And then
scary amount of books.
We were just talking about that before the podcast started. Liz came over to my library, and this is the first time she's physically been here since I've done this. And it's rather shocking to look at the shelves right now and say, wow, because it was full, it was cram packed, and now it's just so sparse, but in a good way. The kids can see what we have and find what they want.
Well, and I think too that it just not only makes the shelves look so much better, but it also shows, like when you're speaking to like your administrators, or you're even doing something like a fundraiser or a book fair, like for people who have interest in your library, it's easier also to show that off because you've done something that is so powerful, by being able to label things nicely and have it be where the kids are really excited about, where there are gaps. And that was one thing too with the kids, is when you start putting those different categories, like I remember the kids even saying, like, there's books about tractors, there's books about deer hunting, like there's books about sewing, like they were, like you said, crammed into the shelves, that so many things had gotten just forgotten. And so I think that was a neat thing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So I have to ask, how many categories did you end up with?
Oh, I haven't actually counted total categories. Do you know how many you have?
I want to say, I could count them real quick. I have them on my thing, but I think I have about 10 categories. With the way that we did it, as I was working through the process, I realized that shelving was going to be kind of a monster if I had too many categories. So I developed some broad categories, five broad categories, and then some subcategories. So I color coded those broad categories so that I could, when I'm sorting on my cart from books being turned in, I could grab, all the purple books that are for my personal category. And then I could go over and put, I have in personal, I had growth for just personal, emotional health, that kind of thing. Food for the cookbooks and chefs, and entertainment. And so then I could go in and sort just within that purple category. So I have 5 overarching categories, and then I have about 10 categories under each one.
Yeah.
Mine's similar, I would say.
Yeah. What about you?
It's kind of like that as well. Like we have a few more broad categories, but one thing that we have found over the years, and you'll see this too, that as your kids start using it and then they start asking questions, like, because they ask questions that you're like, oh, that was like really obvious. Because you're like, why didn't I put it in there? Or you might find them like struggling with it. And so ours has grown over the years in that way, but we have cut down our categories like over the years too, because I think we found that, one thing is that the weeding thing doesn't really stop either. I think when it's like this, because you really see your books closer and you pay attention to what's in the categories. And so even though our collection has stayed probably about the same in number wise, but man, it changes all the time, because if we have a book that's not circulating, then we're looking for another book to fill in that category. But we've definitely cut down on some of the categories, but I like the way that you did the broad categories and then you have kind of the sub, underneath it. I think that's a really cool idea. Ours is color coded as well, which makes it really easy. We use the old AR stickers on ours.
Uh-huh.
And so those little dots, and we just use them that way. But I mean, it's just so helpful. I think it's, yeah. And it's easier to just even shelving books, having that way to, you don't have to look for every number. And that's one question too, that I like that you guys put this on here, because a lot of people also ask me this when I'm talking about it, that isn't this just the same as Dewey, and doesn't Dewey categorize like this too?
That has been a little bit of a hot topic. I knew this was considered, or could be considered, controversial. But I didn't quite understand how tied to Melvin Dewey so many librarians are. And so we did receive some pushback, and people questioning, and they're just very, very loyal to Mr. Dewey and his system. And I think it was a great system, and still is in some cases in some types of libraries, mainly like at the high school and college level. I think that's great. But personally, for the elementary age kids, it's just so complex. And so I've had to answer that question several times from people on Facebook, and I felt like defend my choice. And I always go back to the point of, you only do this if it's a need at your campus. And if you feel like it would benefit your kids. There's no reason to ditch Dewey if your kids understand the system and they can find what they want. But personally, when I started noticing the issues, are mainly things like military books. And I always use that as my example, because in Dewey, and I don't have the numbers memorized exactly, but you have a section in the 300s that are the branches of the military. And then in another section of Dewey, you have military weapons, and then another one, military vehicles. And the kids just want to read all military. And so it was hard to get them to vocalize, well, I want to know everything about the Army. Instead, you would point them, well, I would try to ask, do you want to know about the Army, or do you want to know about weapons, or do you want to know about, and it's too much. And so when you do it this way, you can group all that together under one big category, military, and then they can peruse and decide what it is that they want. Because a lot of times they didn't know that their interest was in military vehicles instead of just an overall book of just a certain armed forces. So I think that's been like a big part of it. And that's where it differs from Dewey.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And that was something too, that it was definitely a local decision. And in my case, it was pretty manageable that way as well. But I think that sometimes it might work for some campuses, but especially with our elementary and our younger kids. I love your example of the military books, because then they're all in one place, and kids know that, and it definitely increases the circulation and reading. Have you checked any of the statistics on that, how it's been in your collection? Have you been able to do that yet?
I have not yet. We don't have Destiny as our system, and we have a different system that's not quite as easy to use. There's a jillion reports on ours, and I haven't yet sat down to figure out, okay, what report exactly am I going to look for and use to compare? So I plan to do that probably this summer, but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah, and that will be interesting. You'll have to let me know, and then we can report back. Because
yeah.
I took note of that really well, and it was just so neat to see. I mean, almost like shocking to see how many more nonfiction books were checked out by our elementary kids. And so I'm sure you guys will see the same thing. Well, I'm sure that people are also wondering, like, oh my gosh, how long did this take you to do?
Yeah, the first time that I started this at the 5-6 campus, when I was doing a lot of troubleshooting, it took me a lot longer. Probably several weeks longer because I've kind of started some things and then started over. But this time I kind of tried to track it a little bit. And I want to say probably from start to finish, maybe a month.
Yeah.
Not that long. I did have a little bit of help. And at my level, I have 7th and 8th graders. So some of the labeling takes a long time. And so I've been able to pull in some help to do some of those things. The bulk of the time, I think, is with labeling.
Mm-hmm.
We decided in cataloging, we really wanted, when you searched for a book, we wanted you to be able to see what section that book was in still, because, you know, there are students that are looking, using the online catalog to locate their books. And so we were able to find a batch, program or process, in our cataloging, where we just added, we didn't take off the Dewey, we just added a prefix before the Dewey. And when I was at the 5-6 campus, I just came up with a 3-letter abbreviation. But now that I've done it at this campus, I actually put the whole word, because I'm not putting it on the actual spine, so it doesn't matter if it's long. So if it's in sports under basketball, then I just put basketball, and they know to go to the basketball shelf, and that's where they can find the book. So that part didn't take very long at all. It's just a matter of scanning the books. Weeding, really, once you came up with your parameters, weeding doesn't take very long. The sorting you can get into your mind a little bit too much on that. And then just the labeling is a little bit time intensive. But I would say probably if you've got, you know, a good organization system, I would say 4 weeks.
Yeah. See, so listeners know that there is hope. And I think people think like, oh my gosh, but I just remember using a lot of sticky notes,
a ton of sticky notes.
Yes, I love it. So is there any other advice that you have for people who are thinking about this? And we'll have also a chance for you to add any resources to the notes and things like that. But why don't you guys leave us with a little advice for listeners if they're thinking about ditching the Dewey too?
One thing that I have done just recently that I think I wish I had known, because it would have motivated me to do this sooner, is I like to get my students involved in my collection development. And so something that I've done now, since I did get a little bit on the stress side, seeing how sparse my nonfiction was. So I gave each of my students on the student collection committee a list of my categories. And I had them go to the shelves and say, okay, well, look at this category. Is there something that you would be interested in reading that's not on the shelf? And make a note on this paper. And they did. They came up with all kinds of things that I didn't even consider that I would want in that section. And they were all saying, I didn't know that we had this section, kind of like you had a student that didn't know there were books on tractors. And so I think the collection development and incorporating student interest in being involved in that, it really does lean itself into doing that in a more interactive way.
And the same is true, I would tack on to that with teachers, getting teacher input as well. I think it's interesting that the teachers have come into the library since I've done this and said things like, I didn't know that you had this whole set from Capstone books on penguins. You have all the penguin books. They've been there for 4 or 5 years, you know, but they just, I guess, couldn't find them when it's all just bogged down with all the books that needed to be weeded. So that was huge. And it made me feel good. It gave me the confidence and, okay, I think I really did make a good decision, that kids are happier, that teachers are happier. And my other piece of advice would be, just if you think this would be beneficial for your school, bite the bullet and go for it, because the payoff is so worth it. Just the benefits that you'll reap after all the work is done makes every bit of that hours of labeling and the hassles of sorting worth it. And another thing is to always remember that when you're sorting, and I would get so bogged down sometimes, but to remember, okay, it's, just because I put a book here doesn't mean it has to stay there.
I was going to say that.
Yeah, I've made so many changes since, even like big category changes. We did one today. We have a book called Clever Hans, and it's all about the horse who, they studied the horse. They thought the horse could understand math. And actually the horse was figured out how to read body language. And so now it's coined, like there's a science term. It's the Clever Hans effect. Okay, so there's this cute little picture book on that. And I think originally we had it in farm animals because of the horse. Okay, if you want to read about horses, you may want to read about Clever Hans. But my para today asked me, I'm just wondering, do you think we should move this book more on the science side? So we got out of animals and moved it into science because of that the scientific process. It talks about how they studied the horse, and then the Clever Hans effect. So it's like, wow, we jumped from one big category to another, and that's okay. That's what makes it so wonderful. You're not tied down and stuck to a certain category. It's all very flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that piece too, because then you can change things around. It doesn't have to be a decision that somebody else makes also for your community. It can be something that you talk about and listen to your kids and your teachers and see, where they think that not only those books are, but like you said, even the gaps. I love that, getting your kids involved too.
Yeah.
Hey, and if you have people or friends that want to try this, we're happy to share all of our spreadsheets and signage and all of those kinds of things, just so that you have a place to jump off from.
Well, I think we should add it to the resources of the podcast and just add it. And I've already asked them to be part of an upcoming webinar summit. And so you'll be able to hear more from them too. But I think that people appreciate that so much because, as you know, it can be challenging. And if somebody maybe is the only librarian or person in the library, it is definitely something, though, that everybody can do. So I love that you're going to share that. That's great. So I'll get all those resources from you too, and we'll add them. Anything that you want to share, we'll add it to the resources so everybody can use it.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
You guys are awesome. Now I want to
great to see you.
Oh, now I want to come back and visit the libraries. So I've been there a few times and always doing great things. So I love that. You guys are amazing. Time well spent, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. We appreciate what you shared, and you're going to be able to find their information attached to this podcast, along with the resources we just talked about, and a certificate of professional development that you can download and fill out to use. As always, thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on this episode of the Future Ready Librarian podcast series, Leading from the Library. And a very special thank you to our sponsors, Follett. You make a difference in our library, schools, and within our lives, and that of our students every day. We appreciate everything that you do. Please send your Future Ready Librarian shout out and shares to me at shannonmcclintockmiller@gmail.com or tag me at Shannon M. Miller. I would love to hear. I have been pulling them out myself, so I need some more, everybody, so we can share them. I hope you can take what you learned in today's podcast and put it to use within your practice as a future ready librarian. Until next time, friends, keep finding ways to lead within and from your library. Thank you for joining us for the Future Ready Librarian podcast, Leading from the Library. I would like to also thank our sponsor, Follett Learning, for their amazing continued support.